Hey guys, so Kim has been recently looking at this cute, I don't know what you'd call it, this cute tulle dress thing made of organza or whatever, and she seems to be really into it, so I'm thinking that I'm going to be making her this dress. So, first thing I gotta do is get some materials to make a pattern for her. So I need some muslin to make the test pattern. And then I'm gonna grab some elastics because I think I'm gonna make it stretchy in the back so that's adjustable and more comfy. And then elastic for the puffy shoulders. Oh yeah, and then some masking tape because I'm gonna try to do something with the pattern that I'm gonna see if it works or not to make it. Maybe this will make it easier, maybe it'll make it harder, I don't know. But I'm gonna try something out with masking tape, and so I'm gonna grab those three things for now, and then let's get this dress made. I'm looking for the cheapest one.
Alright, so now that we've got the materials, let's go ahead and start working on the pattern. This is my general idea for what I want to do for the pattern. I'm gonna get some plastic wrap and masking tape, and I'm gonna get the plastic wrap and I'm just gonna try and wrap it around the body until I get to the part that I kind of want to make a pattern out of, and then use the masking tape and like lay down strips of it over it. And after taping it, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get a marker and mark out where I want the pieces to be separated, and then use some scissors to cut it out. So the idea is that I cut it up, and then when I flatten it out, each of these pieces should give me a general sense of what shape and size each of the pieces should be in the pattern. With these pieces, I can use it to draw up a more clean version of the pattern that I can actually use for the final piece. And now let's try it out. So while making the pattern for this dress, I had Kim wear a sweater underneath it for a few reasons. One of them was so that it wouldn't be too fitted because I didn't want it to be super tight and uncomfortable, and also just because in case Kim wanted to layer anything underneath it, like the sweater she's wearing right now, she can, and it wouldn't look funny with it being so tight, and then it wouldn't be uncomfortable either. In this part over here now where I'm drawing up the pattern pieces, something that you should do that I forgot to do is actually mark out where you want to put the straps for the sleeves, because then you can more accurately draw out the curves for the underarms. Since I forgot to, I had to do some adjustments afterwards about where to put the underarm like curves. Yeah, doing that at this step would make the sewing and pattern making later a lot easier. And then before cutting everything into pieces, I decided to label which parts are what, just so that I don't get confused and it's easier to figure out which parts are which for the pattern. Once it was all labeled, I'd cut up all the pieces, and now look, we have all the parts for our top. Next thing I did to clean up the pattern was to get some blank papers and then lay the patterns on top of it flat and trace around it. For this piece, the pattern is symmetrical on the left and right side, which means that the front right and front left pieces are the same, as well as the rear left and rear right pieces. So I'm only going to make one pattern instead of tracing both sides. The way I chose which side to trace over is I just ended up choosing whichever one was the bigger piece. That way I can have more space and more room to kind of like adjust it once I get to the first testing phase. Once you have traced it, I'm using this curved ruler to kind of clean up the lines and smooth out the curves. After you've done that, add a 1/2 inch seam allowance around everything, and that's it. You just repeat for all the other parts. What you should have in the end is one front pattern for the sides, one front pattern for the center, one back pattern for the sides, and then a back pattern for the center. Now the back pattern for the center will be a bit different from the others, so this is kind of more just for the testing and to make sure that the other pieces fit. The actual back pattern we'll be using will just be double the width, and I'll explain that later. For now, let's start on making the test piece. So we're gonna get some of our muslin and then cut out the patterns, and what we'll do then once we have it all cut out is we'll just sew it all together. Just a quick sew. You don't need to make it super clean or anything. Just make sure that everything isn't falling apart.
Let's see first test. How is that?
That's cute.
Yeah. And then, huh?
That's gonna be so cute.
The poofy parts will be.
Should it be a little more fitted because it's gonna be stretchy?
How's that?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. It looks like it's more like 3/4 of an inch, so then I'll take out 1.5 inches total, 3/4 of an inch on each side down here. Realized that it had to be 0.75 inches smaller on each side of the back piece, so then I just moved the line back over here 0.75 inches and then added the 1/2 inch seam allowance, and so now the new piece is like that. So we did a bit of fitting with our first piece, and we decided that it was a little too baggy at the bottom. So originally it was just one single piece, because when you actually have this flattened, there's still a bit of a bump here when I trace the pattern, so I decided to cut a strip here to flatten out that curve, and then basically made the pattern again the same way as earlier, but with this extra space here to add a dart in. That way, when you actually put it on, it'll be kind of more formed at the curves down here. So yeah, so that's the only change I really made after doing the first test fit. Second test fit basically did the same thing, put the pattern, but this time with the dart, and it turned out well. So we're going with the dart design, the dart pattern, and everything. So yeah. First cuts.
We're going to be using this really cute organza fabric. I'm going to put the link to this one down in the description below.
Ready?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Look at this boy. Look at this boy.
My eyes are dry. I was so focused I didn't blink, so my eyes got really dry from just staring.
Here I've cut out all the pieces, one piece of backing, and then 2 of the organza on top. You don't really necessarily need to do all of these pieces. I personally did it because I wanted the top to be opaque. I added 2 organza pieces because I realized that once I added only one of them, the pattern wasn't as bold on top of the backing, but then when it doubled, it looks a lot better. So I cut out 3 centers, 3 of the left side, 3 of the right side, and then same thing on the back. In total, that's 18 pieces, 12 organza and 6 of the lining. So I'm actually going to be sewing all 3 of the layers together at once and then putting it together, because the organza by itself is pretty difficult to work with, and I don't want that kind of baggy, kind of loose feeling on the top if I do the inner lining and outer lining separately. If sewing is a little nerve-wracking for you, especially with such a nice fabric like this, what I like to do is have a cat on my lap to kind of calm me down and get me through this sewing process.
The only real tricky part was the darts.
The trick I did to sew the darts and to make sure it's in the right spot was I folded this pleat here on this paper and I aligned the fabric on top of the pattern. I folded the paper where I made the crease alongside the organza itself. And then once I was able to fold over both layers of organza together and fold the little pleat, I actually marked where the crease was with a pencil. Since I can't really iron this fabric, I clipped it to the proper marking and then I sewed it on, and that's how I made the dart.
all the pieces for the top are now stitched together. So now next thing I'm gonna do is sew up these pieces. I'm gonna serge these edges and then I'll sew them up to each other and see what that looks like first. And then I'll explain to you how I'm gonna be doing the back. There we go. Ta-da! So far. So the front part of the top is done. And I just gotta do the back elastic, which I'll explain how to do.
Nice.
Alright, so originally for the back, I was going to use this elastic thread and try to shirr the fabric, which means that I have to like wrap it around this bobbin by hand and then kind of stitch across back and forth a bunch, and then it's supposed to automatically give kind of like this effect that I did here on this test fabric. However, I was having a really hard time getting the tensions right on the sewing machine with the bobbin tension and like the top tension. For some reason, it just wasn't gathering properly. And once I finally got it to gather, it wasn't nearly as stretchy as I wanted it to be. The sewing machine was just having a really tough time trying to get the shirring to work on the organza fabric. So I decided to just go ahead and try something else. I ended up sewing a bunch of horizontal channels into the organza fabric. They're about 1/2 inch apart from each other. And I'm going to run this flat elastic in between every other channel inside. I got the elastic and put a safety pin at the end of it, and that makes it just easier to pass through so that you have something to grip on, and you just pass it through every other channel until you get to the bottom. Once you get to the end, just gather up the fabric as much as you can and then sew off the ends of the elastics, cut off the excess. After you've done that, voila, you've got this really nice and stretchy fabric now. Compare that to the old one. Honestly, for me, I think it looks a lot better and it's way more functional. Now we're on to the last stretch. We're gonna start the second half with making the circle skirts. I'm going to be using 3 circle skirts on this because I want to make sure that it's opaque and super fluffy. To measure the size of the circle skirt, there's a lot of circle skirt calculators online that you can find where you can input the waist size and also the length of the skirt that you want, and then it'll tell you what radiuses to actually measure out and cut. So for the waist measurement, remember that this isn't your exact waist. The best way to do this is to measure the actual circumference around the underside of the top. When I say that, I mean including it being stretched out. The elastic on the back, make sure that you're measuring the exact length of it stretched, not when it's all like compressed. Because if you do it when it's compressed, that stretchy part won't actually stretch because the dress part isn't going to be able to take into account the extra width that is added when you open it up. So this part I'm not really going to show how to make because it's just a circle skirt and there's a lot of tutorials online already for that. Last thing you have to do is just sew it together one by one so that you can kind of have different ruffles and textures through all of them so that they won't all be uniform, and it'll give it kind of a fuller feel.
What do you think?
It's so pretty.
You think so?
Yes. Oh,
The back's still stretchy. Boop, boop.
Very nice.
Yep.
Isn't it so cute? There's a sneak peek. Yeah.
What I'm going to try and do is I'll measure from basically, raise your arm, this point where I put like the curve in the underarm, and then this point in the front where the curve at the other arm. So I'm going to measure from there and kind of just go, it's going to go over the shoulder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I want to do it over the shoulder and measure down here. It's 20 inches. And then since I'm going to gather it, I'm going to do maybe like 20, like maybe like double it. Alright, so this will be the strip for the sleeve that I'll be using. It's a 40 inch by 19 inch rectangle.
I got 19 inches from measuring from the shoulder to past the elbow because I want the sleeves to be able to go just past the elbows. So making the sleeves is actually pretty straightforward. First thing I do is I serge the two short sides together to make this kind of long tube. And then similar to how I made the back of the dress with the elastic, I'm going to be sewing two channels, one channel on each end of the tube that we've made where I can insert the elastic. So for this one, I just kind of eyeballed the correct length by just test fitting it and then seeing what was comfortable. So after doing that, you just kind of sew it onto the arm and it's done. I guess all that's left now is to show this dress off.
What's with these working conditions?
Sir, can I please take my break now? Can I take my weekly lunch break?
Oh no. What are you thinking? You're not finished.
Okay.